The wind carried a dry whisper across the open plains, rustling through the golden grass and brushing the dust from the forgotten trail that led to the Weston ranch. The land stretched endlessly beneath a copper sky, broken only by the silhouette of a girl walking barefoot. Her clothes torn from hard labor and travel. Her name was Clara Weston, and though she was only 20, the past few months had carved more hardship into her soul than most endured in a lifetime. Behind her, the world she had known, her family's small ranch, her mother's laughter, her father's steady hands, was gone. All that remained was her brother's betrayal and the man who now hunted her like prey. Clara had always believed family was sacred. Her brother Jed had sworn to protect her when their parents passed. But when the debts began piling high, when the ranch hands demanded wages, and the whiskey merchants came knocking for what he owed, Jed changed. Desperation turned him mean. His eyes grew hollow, his voice rough. He started whispering to men who smelled of dust and blood, men who rode for the most feared rancher west of the Pecosili Thorn. Folks said Thorn built his empire by taking what he wanted, whether it was land, cattle, or people. No sheriff dared cross him. No preacher dared speak against him. And now, Jed had promised Clara as payment for his own debt. She had overheard them the night before she ran. The creak of the barn doors, the murmur of voices, the metallic clink of coins. Then she heard Jed's voice trembling, saying her name, saying she was young and strong and would serve the rancher's needs. She didn't wait to hear more. The knife in her hand was shaking as she cut through the rope of her mare's stall. The moonlight caught her tear-streaked face as she rode out, not knowing where she was headed, only that she couldn't stay. By dawn, she'd ridden deep into Apache territory. The stories said no white man or woman ever came back from there. But to Clara, death in the desert seemed kinder than the life waiting for her in Eli Thorne's grasp. Her horse stumbled over loose rock as they climbed a ridge, the scent of mesquite thick in the air. The silence pressed heavy around her, broken only by the call of a hawk circling high above. She didn't know that someone else was watching. Down in the canyon, a young Apache warrior named Taza tracked her every move. He had seen her ride through his people's sacred valley like a wounded deer, lost, frightened, and alone. The elders had warned him to avoid outsiders, but something in her eyes stopped him from turning away. He knew that look. It was the look of someone being hunted. He had worn it himself once, long ago, when soldiers burned his village and took his sister away. The memory still haunted him like smoke in his lungs. Clara's horse finally gave out by the riverbed, its legs buckling beneath the strain. She slid off, landing hard on the cracked earth. Her throat was dry, her lips blistered, but she stumbled toward the water, kneeling to drink. The reflection staring back at her was not the girl who once laughed under the apple trees of her father's land. This girl's eyes were sharp now, filled with the will to survive. Still, her fear caught up with her when she heard the distant rhythm of hooves. She turned. There, rising from the far ridge, were 4 riders. The Thorn Ranch brand glinted on their saddles. Her heart froze. Jed must have told them which way she went. They had come fast, armed and confident. She scrambled for the fallen mare's saddlebag, fumbling for the small pistol she'd hidden inside, but her shaking hands betrayed her. The riders were close enough now that she could see the smirk on the lead man's face, a scarred man she recognized from the saloon in town. "Clara Weston," he called, his voice carrying over the river's whisper. "Eli Thorne sends his regards. He gave us quite a chase." She raised the pistol, but the man only laughed. "You wouldn't shoot. Got nowhere left to go." Clara's hand trembled. The gun felt heavy. The men spread out, circling her like wolves. Just as one dismounted, reaching for her arm, an arrow cut through the air and buried itself deep into the sand between them. The man stumbled back, startled. Another arrow followed, this one slicing clean through the bandana of the second rider, grazing his cheek. Then silence again, tense, waiting. From the shadows beyond the ridge, Taza stepped into view. His stance was calm but fierce, his eyes unflinching. The desert wind pulled at his long hair as he knocked another arrow, steady and sure. The Thorn men hesitated. One of them cursed under his breath. They'd heard of the Apache warrior who guarded this land, a man said to move like the wind and strike like thunder. Few had seen him and lived to tell the tale. "Who the hell are you?" one of them shouted. Taza didn't answer. His gaze flicked to Clara, then back to the men. Without a word, he drew his bow again. The riders exchanged glances, unsure whether to fight or flee. The silence grew unbearable until the scarred leader spat on the ground and growled, "She's not worth dying for." Then he turned his horse sharply, leading the others away. Their hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of the wind in the river. Clara stood frozen, clutching the pistol to her chest. Her breath came in short bursts as she watched the warrior approach. He stopped a few paces away, lowering his bow but keeping his eyes on her. The desert seemed to hold its breath between them. Finally, she whispered, "You saved me." Taz's face revealed nothing. "You are in my people's land," he said slowly, his English marked with the rhythm of his tongue. "Why are you here?" Clara hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. "I didn't mean to trespass. I had to get away." His gaze softened just slightly. "From those men." She nodded, biting back the tremor in her voice. "They wanted to take me back. My brother, she couldn't finish." The words broke apart in her throat. Taz looked toward the ridge where the riders had disappeared. He could sense they would return. Men like that never accepted humiliation easily. "You cannot stay here," he said firmly. "They will come again. I don't have anywhere else," Clara replied, her voice trembling. "Please. I'll go if you tell me where it's safe." He studied her for a moment, then turned toward the canyon. "Follow me." Clara hesitated but obeyed. She didn't know where he was leading her, maybe to safety, maybe to danger. But something in his calm presence made her trust him, at least for now. As they walked deeper into the canyon, the air grew cooler, filled with the scent of sage and stone. The path narrowed between high red walls, and Clara could hear faint echoes of water ahead. After some time, they reached a hidden valley where the river pooled into a clear spring. The air was alive with the hum of insects and the whisper of leaves. It felt untouched by the world's cruelty, as if time itself had forgotten this place. Taza stopped near a fallen log and turned to her. "You can rest here. No one will find you tonight." Clara sank to her knees, exhausted, her gratitude caught somewhere between words and tears. She looked up at him, trying to read the quiet strength in his face. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. Taz's eyes drifted to the horizon. "Goes once. Someone helped my sister. And because the land does not belong to men who take what is not theirs." For the first time since she fled, Clara felt something close to hope. She watched as he disappeared into the trees, leaving her by the water's edge. The sun dipped lower, painting the rocks in shades of amber and fire. But even in that fragile peace, she knew the night would not stay quiet for long. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Eli Thorne would soon learn that his men had failed.
Ow!
And when he came looking for her himself, the desert would once again run with dust and fury. The girl who had lost everything would have to find her strength or be taken once more. Night settled slow over the canyon, painting the sky in soft streaks of violet and gold before surrendering to the dark. The fire Taza built flickered low, its glow dancing across Clara's weary face. She sat wrapped in a blanket he had given her, still trembling from everything that had happened. Her mind replayed the sound of hooves, the glint of steel, her brother's voice offering her name to strangers, like she was something to be traded. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory rose again, sharp as a knife. She wondered if her brother felt even a shred of guilt or if fear of Eli Thorne had already buried whatever love he once had for her. Taza sat a short distance away, sharpening his blade in silence. The sound of stone against metal was steady, almost rhythmic. The flames cast a shadow against the canyon wall, tall and still. Clara wanted to speak but didn't know how. Everything about him felt different from anyone she'd ever met. His quiet strength, his careful movements, the way he seemed to notice every rustle in the wind. She had grown up among people who filled the silence with talk, but Taza carried it like armor. Finally, she found her voice. "Do you live here alone?" He glanced at her, his dark eyes calm. "For a time, my people move with the seasons. I stay to watch the land." She nodded, drawing the blanket tighter. "You said they'd come back for me?" "They will," he answered simply. "Men like that don't forget their shame." The way he said it made her shiver. The truth in his tone left no room for comfort. She looked toward the dark ridge that walled the canyon. Somewhere beyond it, Eli Thorne's men were likely regrouping, and she had no doubt Thorn himself would be furious. No man of his power would let something he claimed slip away. She didn't know exactly what Thorn wanted from her, and she didn't dare imagine it. What she did know was that he was a man used to getting what he wanted, and her brother had made her part of that bargain. When the wind picked up, the smell of rain drifted down from the mountains. Clara turned toward Taza again. "Why would my brother do this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We had nothing left but each other. Our parents are gone." The ranch was barely standing. Would have helped him if he asked, but he didn't even tell me. Taza looked into the fire before answering. "Debt makes weak men desperate. When fear takes root, it grows faster than loyalty." His words sank deep. Clara thought of Jet's face the last time she saw him. There had been something in his eyes, fear, yes, but also shame. She wondered if he had convinced himself that handing her over would somehow save them both. But deep down she knew the truth. Jet had chosen himself. The fire crackled between them. Taz's gaze drifted to the stars, scattered bright and sharp above the canyon rim. "Your brother's choice will bring more trouble than he knows. Eli Thorne's kind leave nothing behind but ashes." Clara frowned. "You know him?" Taza nodded once. "I've seen his riders. Years ago they came south, taking cattle that didn't belong to them. When we warned them to leave, they burned an entire valley to the ground." Her stomach turned. Why would anyone follow a man like that? Taz's jaw tightened. Fear, greed, power. In your towns, such men build empires. Here they destroy them. The way he said your towns stung, though she understood why. The settlers and the Apache had lived as enemies for so long that trust between them was rare. Clara wasn't sure what to say, so she stayed quiet. The fire popped softly, and in that quiet, she began to study him more closely. There was something about Taza that didn't fit the stories she'd been told back home. He didn't seem cruel or savage. He moved with the calm of someone who understood the land, not someone who sought to control it. It made her wonder how many other lies she'd grown up believing. Hours passed before exhaustion finally pulled at her eyes. Taza kept watch, never seeming to tire. She slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of Thorne's ranch endless fences, men with rifles, and a shadowed figure waiting at the porch. Smiling without warmth, she woke just before dawn, her heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air was cool. Taza was gone. Panic surged for a moment until she saw him return, carrying a handful of wild berries and a water skin. "Eat," he said quietly, handing them to her. "You'll need your strength. Where are we going?" He looked up at the rising sun. "Farther east. To higher ground. There's a place where my people keep watch. You'll be safe there." Clara hesitated. Safe how long? He didn't answer, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. As they packed, Clara's thoughts wandered to Thorne again. She had seen him once before, long ago, when her father was still alive. He'd ridden into town with a dozen men, all of them dressed in fine leather and dusted with silver spurs. People had stepped aside when he passed. He'd spoken softly, but even the sheriff had listened like a child before him. That memory, sharp and distant, returned now with a chill. She'd been too young to understand then why grown men feared him. She understood all too well. By midday, they were deep in the mountains. The path was narrow, winding between cliffs and thick pine. Clara struggled to keep up, but Taza moved like he knew every inch of the land. She watched him as he guided her, his step sure, his eyes scanning every shadow. He seemed to sense danger before it came, pausing often to listen to the wind. Once he lifted his hand suddenly, signaling her to stop. She froze, holding her breath. From somewhere below came the faint sound of horses. Taza crouched low, his expression hardening. "They're following," he whispered. Clara's heart jumped. How close? Too close. They stayed hidden behind a rock ledge, barely breathing as the riders passed below. She recognized the thorn brand on their horses. There were 6 of them now, not 4. One of them was holding something in his hand, her brother's hat. She felt her stomach drop. Her pulse thudded in her ears as the men scanned the trail, voices low but tense. "Boss says she ain't far," one of them muttered. "Tracks head this way. If that Apache's with her, we'll have to be careful," another replied. "He's killed more men than smallpox." Taz's hand tightened on his knife, but he stayed silent. Clara could feel the tension in his stillness. The riders moved on slowly, their voices fading with the echo of hooves. Only when the sound was gone did Taza motion for her to move again. They climbed higher until the trail opened onto a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, Clara could see miles of wild country rolling hills, dry riverbeds, distant smoke rising like ghosts. "We're not safe yet," Taza said. "They will search every canyon." She swallowed hard. "If they find us, what then?" His eyes met hers. The way he said it sent a cold shiver through her. She could see in his face that he meant it. This was a man who had seen too much to bluff. Clara wanted to be brave, but fear pressed against her chest like a weight. "I don't even know how to shoot straight," she admitted quietly. "Then you will learn," he said, before sunset. They stopped near a stream where the water shimmered under the afternoon sun. Taza handed her a small bow and a quiver of arrows. "Hold it like this," he said, guiding her hands. "Your fear makes you shake. Breathe with the wind, not against it." She tried, though her fingers fumbled. The first arrow missed the mark completely, landing with a dull thud in the dirt. Taza didn't scold her, he just nodded once. Again. They practiced until the shadows grew long. Each time, her aim steadied a little more. Sweat ran down her temples, and her arms ached, but she didn't stop. Something inside her had shifted a spark of anger, a spark of will. She was done running blind. If Thorne's men came again, she would not go quietly. As night fell, they made camp by the stream. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the moon hung heavy over the mountains. Clara sat close to the fire, her hands still trembling, though not from fear this time. Taza sat nearby, carving a small piece of wood, the firelight glinting on his knife. "You learn quickly," he said at last. She looked at him. "You think I'll need it soon?" "Yes," he said simply. "They'll come at dawn." Her breath caught. "You're sure?" "I can feel it," he replied. Men like Thorne don't sleep when their pride is wounded. The thought sent a chill through her. But there was something else, too, something fierce that rose inside her chest. For the first time since running, she didn't feel completely helpless. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she would face it standing. Taza tossed another branch into the fire, and the flames leapt high, throwing sparks into the night. The silence stretched between them again, thick and steady. Far away, a wolf howled, and the sound echoed across the canyon. Clara looked toward the dark horizon where the riders would come, her heart beating faster. In the flicker of the fire, she realized this night would change everything: the hunted girl and the warrior of the desert, standing together against the man who ruled with fear. The dawn would bring blood, truth, and choices neither of them could turn from. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Eli Thorne's men were already riding hard, following the faint trail that led straight to them. The night before dawn was thick and restless. The fire had burned down to embers, and every sound in the dark seemed sharper than it should be. Clara sat awake, her knees drawn close, staring into the dying glow. She could hear the faint rustle of the wind through the cottonwoods, the low murmur of the stream, and somewhere in the distance, the lonely cry of a coyote. Each sound pressed against her nerves, reminding her that somewhere out there, men were closing in. Taza had barely moved since sunset. He sat cross-legged on the edge of the camp, his bow across his knees, listening. His stillness unsettled her at first, but now it gave her a strange kind of comfort. He seemed to sense the rhythm of the land in ways she never could. When the wind shifted, he looked up suddenly, scanning the ridge. "They're closer than I hoped," he said quietly. Clara's breath caught. "You can tell?" He nodded. "Horses carry a scent when they've been ridden long, and the wind brings it." She tried to smell what he did, but all she caught was dust and pine. "Then we should go." Taza's eyes stayed on the horizon. "If we run now, they'll track us easy. Stay. We choose the ground." His calmness made her heart pound even faster. She wanted to believe he could protect them both, but the fear of Thorne's men was heavy in her chest. She could still see the brand on their saddles and the look of the scarred rider who had spoken her name by the river. He had meant to take her back no matter what it cost. And now he would be twice as determined. Taza turned toward her, his voice low but steady. "You've done well to learn fast. Today you'll need to remember it." Clara looked down at her hands, still sore from gripping the bow. "What if I can't do it? What if I freeze? He studied her for a moment. Fear's not weakness, he said. It's what keeps you alive. Don't let it own you. The words lingered with her as the first hint of dawn touched the mountains. Pale light crept across the canyon walls, turning the stones pink and gold. The beauty of it struck her for a moment, so still, so far removed from the chaos waiting to unfold. Then Taza stood, gathering his weapons. We move now, he said. They climbed up to a narrow ridge above the camp, where rocks and brush gave good cover. From there, they could see the valley floor stretching out below, scattered with sage and stone. Clara followed his instructions, placing herself where the shadows still clung. She felt her heartbeat quicken when Taza suddenly froze, his eyes narrowing. 6 riders appeared from the west, their silhouettes cutting against the morning light. They moved slow at first, scanning the trail. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the scarred man in the lead. His posture was confident, cruel. Behind him, another rider held something that twisted her gut, a torn piece of her shawl. They had been close enough to find what she left behind. Taza motioned for her to stay down. He crouched low, studying the men's formation. They'll try to circle, he murmured. They always do. The scarred one is their head. If he falls, the rest may scatter. Clara's throat tightened. You mean to kill him? He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. The riders dismounted and spread out, rifles slung, their boots crunching over the gravel. The scarred man raised his hand, signaling 2 of them to move toward the stream. Taza reached for an arrow. Its movements were silent, fluid, like the land itself had taught him how to move unseen. Clara gripped her bow, her palms slick with sweat. The air was heavy with tension. She could hear her own breathing, too loud in her ears. The first shot came quicker, sharp whistle through the air, then the dull thud of impact. One of Thorne's men dropped without a sound. The others shouted, scrambling for cover. The scarred man barked orders, his rifle flashing in the rising light. The fight broke loose across the canyon. Taza moved like a shadow, his arrows finding their marks with unerring precision. Clara stayed low, remembering his instructions, her hands shaking as she tried to steady her aim. When one of the men broke off and began climbing toward her position, instinct took over. She raised the bow, drew back the string, and released. The arrow missed but startled him enough to make him stumble. Taza's next shot ended his climb. For a brief moment, silence fell again, broken only by the echo of gunfire fading into the hills. Then a sharp cry rang out from below. The scarred man was down, clutching his arm, but he wasn't dead. He crawled toward his horse, blood darkening his sleeve. Clara could see his face twisted with rage as he shouted something she couldn't hear. The remaining riders dragged him up, retreating back toward the valley. Taza watched them go, his bow still drawn. They'll return, he said quietly. Clara nodded, her breath shaking. Then what do we do now? We move east. There's an old trail that leads to my people's winter ground. They won't follow that far without fear. She looked down at the still form of one of the fallen men below. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had seen death before, when her father passed, when drought took their cattle, but this was different. This was violence done in defense, not mercy. Her stomach turned, and she turned away. Taza noticed, but said nothing. He gathered his arrows, wiping them clean before tucking them back into the quiver. His calmness was almost unnerving, as if this kind of moment was as natural to him as breathing. Clara wanted to ask how many times he had fought like this, but she couldn't bring herself to. They left the ridge before the sun climbed high, following a hidden path through the pines. The ground was steep, the air thin, but Clara pushed on. Each step took them deeper into country she had never seen before, places untouched by the ranchers or miners who carved up the rest of the land. The trees grew thicker, and streams cut silver through the moss-covered rocks. For the first time, she understood what her father had meant when he said the West could be both cruel and beautiful. By midday, they reached a narrow valley surrounded by cliffs. Taza stopped, scanning the ground. We rest here, he said. Clara sank against a fallen log, her body aching. She looked around, noticing signs of an old camp ashes buried under dirt, the faint remains of a fire ring.
Oh, your people were here once, she said.
Taza nodded. Long ago. Before the soldiers came. His tone carried the weight of memory, and Clara felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't know what they did," she said softly. "To your people. I mean, I heard stories, but not the truth." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Stories are told to comfort those who take. Truth belongs to those who lose." The words stayed with her long after. She thought about her own loss, her home, her family, her brother. In her world, she had believed hardship was something temporary, something a person could endure and outlast. But now she saw that some losses carved deeper, changing everything that came after. As the sun dipped lower, a faint sound reached them, distant thunder. Only it wasn't thunder. Taz's head snapped up. "Riders again," he said, "more than before." Clara's pulse quickened. How many? 10? Maybe 12? Thorn must be leading them now. The mention of Thorn's name filled the air like a shadow. She remembered his cold smile, the power in his voice, the way even the sheriff bowed when he spoke. He wasn't coming just to reclaim her. He was coming to make an example. Taza moved quickly, checking his weapons. "If we stay, they'll trap us. If we move, we may reach the pass before sunset." Clara stood, gripping the bow tightly. "Then let's move." They hurried along the narrow path leading toward the high ridge, the sound of hooves growing louder behind them. The air trembled with the coming storm of pursuit. Clara's legs burned, her breath ragged, but she didn't stop. She could see Taza ahead, moving fast, glancing back every few moments. The tension in the air felt like a held breath waiting to break. By the time they reached the edge of the pass, the sky was streaked red with the coming dusk. Below, a dozen riders poured into the valley, their shouts echoing like thunder. Thorn was there, unmistakable, even from a distant stall, broad-shouldered, his coat black as coal, his presence commanding. He raised his rifle, and the crack of the shot tore through the stillness. The bullet struck the rock near Clara's feet, shattering it into shards. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Taza grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the higher ground. "Keep going," he said, his voice sharp.
"Oh."
Behind them, Thorn's men began to climb, their shouts closing in. The mountain air filled with the sound of gunfire and falling stone. Taza fired back once, twice, buying them seconds at a time. Clara ran harder than she ever had before, her breath tearing through her chest. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of pursuit, the rush of blood in her ears, and the flash of fear in her heart. When they reached the crest of the ridge, Taza stopped, turning to face the riders below. His silhouette stood against the burning sky, bow drawn tight. Clara turned too, her hands trembling, but steady enough to aim. Thorn's men were still climbing, relentless. The battle that had begun in the canyon was about to find its reckoning in the mountains, and this time there would be no running. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying dust and grit. Taza glanced at her once, his expression firm. "Stand your ground," he said. "This is where we make them stop." And as the first rider reached the edge, the war between freedom and fear began again, under the dying light of the sun. The sky burned with streaks of red and orange as the last light of day slipped behind the mountains. The wind had turned sharp, carrying the smell of dust and sweat. Clara could feel her pulse pounding in her throat, the bow trembling in her hands as she stared down the ridge at the approaching riders. Eli Thorn's men climbed the rocky path below, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls like war cries. Each hoofbeat sent loose stones tumbling down the slope. They were coming fast. Taza stood ahead of her, calm but tense, his silhouette framed against the dying sun. He moved with the certainty of someone who had faced death before. His bow was drawn tight, his eyes locked on the lead rider. Clara could see the muscle in his jaw tighten as he whispered under his breath in his own language. The sound was steadying, like a prayer meant for the earth itself. Then the first shot cracked through the air. A bullet struck the rock beside Clara, sending chips flying. She dropped low, heart hammering, her ears ringing. Taza loosed an arrow in answer. It found its mark, dropping one of the riders instantly. The others didn't slow. They fired back, flashes of light flaring in the shadows below. The air filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. "Stay low," Taza said sharply, reaching for another arrow. "Wait until they're closer." Clara nodded, gripping the bow so tightly her knuckles whitened. The fear inside her was raw, but beneath it was something else, a stubborn refusal to be taken again. Every memory of Thorn's cruelty, every word her brother had spoken in betrayal, burned through her like fire. Thought that she steadied her breath. The riders fanned out, using the rocks for cover. Clara caught a glimpse of Thorn himself, tall and grim in the saddle, his rifle resting across his arm. Even from here, his voice carried, commanding his men with cold precision. He didn't shout like most men would in a fight. His tone was quiet, cruelly calm. That alone made her skin crawl. Taza fired again, striking another rider who had tried to flank them. "They'll push from both sides," he said. "When they come close, we move higher." "There's no higher," Clara whispered, glancing at the narrow ridge behind them. It led to nothing but open air and a deadly drop. Taz's eyes flicked toward the edge. "Then we make our stand." The riders were closing in. Clara drew her bow, the string biting into her fingers. When the first man came into range, she released. The arrow cut through the air and grazed his arm, knocking him back just long enough for Taza to finish him with another shot. For a brief moment, she felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could hold them off. But then Thorn dismounted. He stood tall among the chaos, dust swirling around him, his long coat snapping in the wind. Even with his men shouting and firing around him, he moved slowly, deliberately, his cold gaze never leaving the ridge. Then his voice cut through the noise. "Clara Weston." The sound of her name froze her in place. It wasn't a yell. It was too measured for that, too certain. He might as well have been calling to a child. Taz's head turned sharply toward her, his expression hard. "Do not answer." But Thorn kept speaking, his words carrying with unnatural calm across the rocks. "You can't run forever, girl. You know what waits for you out here. No water, no food, no mercy. Come down, and maybe I'll forget what your brother owes me." Clara clenched her jaw, her whole body shaking. "He's lying," she whispered. "I know," Taza said. Thorn took a step forward, his rifle gleaming in the fading light. "That savage can't save you. He'll die before morning, and then you'll wish you'd listened." Taz's expression didn't change, but Clara could see the anger behind his stillness. He raised his bow, aiming straight at Thorn, but before he could release, one of the riders fired from the side. The bullet struck near Taz's shoulder, grazing his skin and tearing through his shirt. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Clara gasped, reaching for him, but he waved her off. "I'm fine," he said through clenched teeth. Blood darkened his arm, but he pulled another arrow and fired, hitting the man who'd shot him. The fight raged on, the ridge shaking with gunfire. Clara shot until her hands were raw, her fingers blistered from the bowstring. The air stung her eyes, filled with dust and smoke. Still, Thorn's men pressed closer. There were too many. Taza turned toward her, his breath ragged. "We can't stay here. Follow me." They retreated along the narrow path that wound higher along the cliffside. Behind them, bullets sparked against the stone. Clara nearly lost her footing, her boots sliding on loose gravel. Taza caught her arm, pulling her back just as a shot tore through the air where she had been standing. They reached a small platada, dead end surrounded by rock. Clara's heart sank. There's nowhere else to go. Taza looked at the edge, then back at her. "We hold here. The mountain favors those who stand their ground." Below, Thorn and his riders were regrouping. The scarred man she remembered from before was among them, his arm bandaged, his face twisted with fury. He pointed toward the ridge, shouting for the others to flank them. Thorn, calm as ever, simply adjusted his coat and began the slow climb himself. Clara couldn't understand it at first. Why would a man like him come up here in person when he had men to do it for him? Then she saw it, the pride in his movements, the hunger for control. He wanted to be the one to break them, to prove his power was untouchable. Taza saw it too. "He comes himself," he murmured. That is his mistake. The minutes stretched, every heartbeat echoing like thunder. Clara's throat was dry, her hands trembling as she knocked another arrow. The wind had grown stronger, howling across the cliffs, carrying the smell of blood and smoke. Each gust threatened to tear her balance away, but she held her ground beside Taza. When Thorn's men appeared again, they came hard and fast, firing wildly. Two fell almost immediately to Taz's arrows, but the others kept advancing. Clara fired when she could, ducking low when bullets struck the rock beside her. The air vibrated with the clash of sound gunfire shouts, the scrape of boots on stone. Then from below, Thorn's voice rose once more, low and commanding. "Enough of this. Burn them out." Clara froze. She saw two of the men pull something from their saddlebags, bundles wrapped in cloth. The moment they lit the ends, she knew what they were. Firebombs. Taza cursed under his breath. "Down," The first explosion shook the ridge, sending a wave of heat and flame into the air. Clara fell hard against the ground, the smell of burning sage filling her lungs. Sparks scattered everywhere, clinging to her clothes. Taza grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the flames as another blast erupted below. The narrow path was now half gone, swallowed by fire. "They'll trap us here," she said, coughing. Taza glanced around, eyes darting between the burning slope and the cliff edge. The drop below was steep, but there was a narrow shelf halfway down. "We climb," he said. Before she could protest, he was already tying a length of leather cord around a rock to lower them. Bullets still hissed overhead. Clara's fear spiked, but she followed, clutching the rope as smoke curled around them. Her boots slipped against the cliff face, her palms burning from the friction, but she kept going. Below her, Taza moved with steady precision, guiding her down. Halfway down, a bullet struck the stone beside her, sending shards flying. She lost her grip, her body swinging out over the edge. A cry escaped her lips. Taza reached up, grabbing her wrist just in time. "Hold on," he said, his voice strained. She did, her heart pounding as he steadied her against the rock, the smell of gunpowder mixed with smoke, thick and choking. From above, Thorne's men shouted in triumph, thinking they had them cornered. When they finally reached the lower ledge, Clara collapsed, her arms shaking. Taza crouched beside her, listening. "They'll think we fell," he said quietly. "It will buy us time." But even as he spoke, the sound of Thorne's boots on the rocks echoed above. He was coming down himself, slow and careful, determined to finish what he started. Clara looked up at Taza, her voice barely more than a whisper. "He won't stop, will he?"
Taza
met her gaze. "No. Men like him never do." The firelight above cast their shadows long against the canyon wall. Smoke swirled around them, and the air trembled with heat. Thorne's men were shouting orders, their torches glowing like stars of flame. The sound of horses retreating told Clara that Thorne meant to take them alive. Taza placed a hand on her shoulder. "When I tell you to run, go to the river. Follow it east until you find the old stone bridge. Do not look back." "What about you?" she asked. He looked up the burning slope, his eyes steady. "I'll make sure he follows me, not you." The words hit her harder than the wind. She wanted to protest, to tell him they'd survive together. But she saw in his face the resolve of someone who had already made peace with danger. Above them, Thorne's shadow loomed closer, framed by firelight and smoke. His rifle gleamed. His voice came again, calm, deadly. "You can run, girl, but the desert always gives back what it takes." The words echoed down the cliffs, mingling with the crackle of burning brush and the moan of the wind. Clara's heart hammered as Taza lifted his bow one last time. The next moment hung suspended in silence the hunted girl. The warrior and the man who ruled by fear all, bound together on the edge of the world. As the fire climbed higher and the mountain waited to decide who would fall, the mountain held its breath. Every sound, every crackle of the dying fire seemed distant and hollow as Thorne's shadow appeared above the ledge. The orange glow from the flames made his face look almost inhuman, half hidden in smoke and fury. His boots scraped against the rock as he descended, rifle drawn, his voice carrying low and cold. "You should have stayed where you belonged," he said. "Would have saved you both a world of pain." Taza stayed still, one hand braced against the rock, the other gripping his bow. His arm was still bleeding, but his focus didn't waver. Clara knelt behind him, her breath short, her palms pressed against the cool stone to keep steady. The heat from above burned her skin, but fear burned even hotter inside her chest. Thorne came closer, each step deliberate. "You've got no place to run now," he said, his voice echoing down the canyon. "Your brother knew what he owed. You think one Apache can stand against that kind of debt?" Taz's jaw tightened. "He stands for honor," he said, his tone calm but cutting. "Something you lost long ago?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Honor doesn't pay a man's way." He raised his rifle. Before he could fire, Taza moved. In one swift motion, he loosed an arrow that flew straight through the smoke. The sound that followed was sharp and final. Thorne's rifle dropped from his hand as he staggered, clutching his shoulder. His expression twisted, more from disbelief than pain. Clara gasped. The rifle clattered against the stone and tumbled into the firelight below. Thorne fell to one knee, his breath ragged. "Regret that," he hissed. But Taza didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly, eyes steady, bow still in hand. "This mountain does not belong to men like you," he said quietly. "It remembers what you take, and it takes back what you forget." Thorn's anger turned to something darker, a kind of madness that came from knowing he'd lost. He reached for the knife at his belt, but his strength failed him. He slipped backward, his boot catching loose rock. The edge gave way beneath him. The sound of falling stones echoed through the canyon, followed by silence. Clara stared, her breath caught in her throat. The smoke drifted over the cliffside, hiding the fall from view. It was over so fast she could hardly believe it. The man who had haunted her nights, who had turned her brother's weakness into a weapon, was gone. Taza lowered his bow, his shoulders heavy. "Come," he said softly. "The fire will not hold much longer." They climbed down from the ledge carefully, using what little of the path was left. The smoke made it hard to breathe, and Clara's arms ached from the climb, but she kept her focus on the sound of Taza's voice guiding her. When they finally reached the canyon floor, the night was quiet again. It's only the faint crackle of burning brush and the whisper of the river below broke the stillness. Clara knelt beside the stream, cupping her hands to drink. The cold water steadied her, washing away the dust and fear that clung to her. When she looked up, Taza was binding his wound with a strip torn from his sleeve. His movements were careful, practiced, but his face was pale. "You need rest," she said, standing to help him. He shook his head. "We move before dawn. His men may still follow." Clara wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. She gathered what little she could, her bow, the quiver, and a few supplies they had managed to keep. Together they walked along the riverbank, the glow of the fire fading behind them. The desert was quiet now. The stars stretched wide above, cold and endless. Each step felt heavy, but with every mile they put between themselves and that burning ridge, Clara felt something new rise within her. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was something quieter, steadier. Freedom had a strange weight to it, one she wasn't used to carrying. When they stopped to rest beneath a line of cottonwoods, the air had turned cooler. Taza sat near the water, watching the ripples move with the current. Clara settled beside him, her knees drawn close. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a kind of peace that came after too much noise. Finally, Clara broke it. She said quietly, "You didn't even know me." Taza looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile in his eyes. "You were being hunted. My people do not turn away from those who run from cruelty." She lowered her gaze. "You risked everything." He nodded slightly. "A life is worth more than land or coin." His voice was calm, but there was weariness behind it. Clara thought about her brother, then about his trembling hands when he'd told her what he'd done. It's about the shame in his eyes when Thorn had taken her away. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him, but she knew she had to let the memory stop controlling her.
"What will you do now?" she asked.
Taza stared toward the dark horizon. "The tribes move north when the rains come. I will join them again, but for now, we follow the river. It will lead us to safety." The days that followed were long and quiet. They traveled through canyons and across open plains, where the wind seemed to carry old songs from a time before fences. Clara learned to move quietly, to read the signs of the land the way Taza did. He showed her how to find water where the earth cracked dry, how to tell when a storm was near, just by the scent of the air. Sometimes when the nights were clear and the stars bright, she would catch him looking at the sky with an expression she couldn't quite name. He never spoke much about his past, but she sensed he carried stories like stones in his heart, heavy unspoken, but part of who he was. By the time they reached the old stone bridge, the wounds had begun to heal. The land there was greener, the river wider and calmer. For the first time in weeks, Clara saw people again, a small trading post with smoke rising from chimneys and the sound of laughter in the distance. Taza stopped at the edge of the ridge, looking down at the town. "This is where we part," he said quietly. Clara turned to him, her heart tightening. "You're not coming with me?" He shook his head. "The world beyond that bridge is not mine. You'll be safe there." She looked at him for a long time, the words catching in her throat. He had saved her life more times than she could count. He had faced death to protect her, asking for nothing in return. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally. You already have, he replied. We kept fighting. The wind moved through the grass between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then slowly, she reached out and pressed his hand. His grip was strong, but there was warmth in it, a quiet understanding that didn't need more words. When she crossed the bridge, she turned back once. Taza was still there, standing on the ridge, his dark hair lifted by the wind. He raised his hand in farewell, and she felt a sting in her chest she couldn't name. Then he turned and disappeared into the horizon. Clara walked into the town with the rising sun at her back. The people there looked at her with curiosity, but she kept her head high. She found work helping at a small trading post near the river, learning to build something new out of what was left. She never spoke much about the man who had saved her, or the one who had tried to own her. But sometimes at night, she would look at the distant hills and remember the sound of the wind in the canyons, the steady calm in Taz's voice, and the lesson he had taught her without ever saying it outright, that strength isn't in how loud a person fights, but how they keep standing even when the world tries to break them. The mountains that once trapped her now stood like silent guardians on the edge of the sky. Somewhere out there, she knew Taza was walking the land he belonged to, free as the wind that crossed the desert. And though their paths had divided, part of her would always carry the memory of that ridge the fire. The fear and the moment she learned that courage could come from the most unexpected place. When night fell over the plains, Clara stood by the riverbank and let the cool water run through her fingers. The reflection of the moon rippled across the surface, calm and endless. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not of fear this time, but of gratitude. The desert had taken much, but it had also given her back something no one could ever steal. Her freedom, sea,